Welcome to Connect, Curate, Create, where we're on a journey through the arts and creative industries. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Butcher. If you're anything like me, you love learning about art and creativity. In each episode, I ask artists and creatives how they navigate life, work, and more besides. They generously share their stories and offer invaluable insights that you and I can put into action. As the author of Creative Work Beyond Precarity, I blend my mission to give artists a fair go with my academic smarts, to ask the questions that draw out lessons we can all learn from.
If you're working with anyone in the creative industries, they've had some kind of crappy experience that was really poorly designed, that didn't acknowledge the amazingness of who they are as whole human beings, and that leads from emotional dysregulation right up to trauma response. And so rather than having to help people see that the rules that they have unknowingly adopted out as norms in the way the industry works are unhelpful through to traumatizing, if we can work earlier on in the training model with our creatives to help before they realise there are these rules, unspoken and spoken rules, we can set them up for better success, which is primarily around these areas of values and self-care. Be someone who's making a positive contribution through your work and surrounding yourself with others who are doing the same thing. So I think that magnetising into groups to find others who have a shared alignment is going to go a long way.
In this episode, I talk with Susan Eldridge, a classical musician and educator based in Melbourne, Victoria. Susan shares a journey from playing in the community band to educating the next generation of artists. She offers considerable insights into cultivating our self-advocacy, how to fully value ourselves and our practices, and the importance of creating safe spaces for us all to realise our potential. Be sure to check out the show notes for highlights and links that you can use to shape your own journey. And if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about Connect, Curate, Create. Welcome back to the podcast. Today is another remote recording. I am here in Tassie, as usual, and with me is Susan Eldridge. Susan's in Victoria. Susan is a classical musician and educator. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, Tim. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. And Susan and I, we met in Tassie probably about 6 months ago, actually, last October, at a workshop that Susan was running. And I have to say, I am a terrible student. I do not sit in a classroom well, and particularly, it was a 3-hour workshop, Susan, and I was captivated. I was participating actively, and I took so much away from it. It was such a great educational experience. So, Susan, it was all about, it was called Growing Pains in the Arts, Resilience and Entrepreneurship. And so clearly, what I took away from that is that you really care. So as a educator, what is it that you really care about?
Yeah. That's such a big question, Tim, and I absolutely will get into that. But I think just before I begin to speak, I'd like to just acknowledge that I'm joining you from Wurundjeri lands today, the traditional lands of the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, acknowledging that sovereignty has not been ceded. Thanks for joining you from Melbourne today. So the question was about what I care about. Is that right?
Yeah, as an educator, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think the thing that bothers me most of all, and I'm going to come at this with my sort of classical musician hat on, but also more generally as someone who cares really deeply about enabling others to do their work, is I think a lot of our learning spaces are not very safe. They're not safe to be vulnerable. They're not safe to take risks. They're not safe to speak your mind. And so the thing that matters more to me actually than the content is that the space is a safe space where everyone is gathered to participate in a way that's equitable, and that they can speak without sort of fear of retribution or fear of judgment of others. So that's the thing that grounds me in all of the training that I do, that I deliver in person. And also I write lots of training models for other people to deliver in conservatories and around the world, or orchestras. If anything where they need to shift people from A to B, whatever that is, I care really deeply that the conditions are going to support people to be able to be emotionally well regulated and fully able to engage with the other people in the room and the person who's guiding you and the content. So that's my grounding principle, really. It's about safety.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that really resonates with my own experience of the workshop that I attended. And look, the connections that I made from that, look.
And I think, Tim, that comes from you felt safe to be yourself. You felt safe to be fully integrated, and hopefully others felt safe that as well. So that enables it. It means that I'm as the guide, I don't hold all the power and the knowledge in the room. You hold the expertise and you hold the knowledge, and I'm simply there helping shepherd that or wayfind along the way and provide the framework. So that what you said about the connections, that's as valuable probably as the content that you've learned, was you've connected with like-minded people who can continue to support each other when I'm not there anymore.
So, Susan, we'll probably come back to education more fully later, but I just wanted to perhaps come back to your own background as a classical musician and how that informs both your ethic of care, your making of safe spaces, and you sort of referred to that. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about where it all began, and so how you moved, how you became a classical musician, and then how you've moved from that into education.
It's a great question, Tim, and it's a story I enjoy telling, because if I said to you that I've always been an outlier, I think that sort of sets the scene for actually everything for me. So I actually started off in brass band land, which is a place I hold near and dear to my heart in the very far north of Queensland, so the opposite end of Australia from where you are right now. So I grew up, music for me was something that you played in multi-generational ensembles, with Ian, who's 72 on the trombone, who's retired from his job in a bank, and Jan, who's 36, who took up the saxophone because her kids were learning at school. And so the purpose of making music as a brass band is to play for your community. You play at the aged care homes, and you play at the citizenship ceremonies, and you march at Anzac Day. So it's music making with people of many generations and backgrounds. And the purpose of it is the soundtrack of the life of your community. And that's very different from the privileged elitist world of classical music where I kind of ended up. So I really wanted my life to be centered in these principles of with people, for people, using music as a mechanism. So when I went to the conservatorium, having this background where nearly everybody else around me was from quite a privileged background, they'd had a lot of very high quality formal music education. Lots of them had come through the youth orchestra model, where you only play with people 1 or 2 years above or below you. And you play in concerts in very formal settings. So I was a bit of an outlier because that wasn't what music was for me. And I knew at the time that that having a job playing in an orchestra was probably not going to be the outcome for me. So I'd realised fairly early on that I think behind the scenes, making the music happen is a space where I get to do the thing that I want to do, and I don't have to go through the very difficult performance anxieties that had plagued me all throughout my years, because no one spoke to me about the fact that it's a thing that's real. You don't have to hide it. And there's there's strategies you can do to deal with that. That wasn't something that in the 90s really people spoke about. So I was crippled with a couple of different things. One was I'm this kid from the country. I don't understand the language that you're speaking. I don't fit in, basically, was what went on. And plus coupled with this performance anxiety. So I left the degree planning to go into arts administration. And then life happened. It didn't quite work out that way. And I ended up falling into large-scale event management of a really big program that used to run here in Australia called the Rock Eisteddfod. And anybody over the age of about 38 will know that event very near and dear to their hearts. So I was tour managing this thing for a while, and then I moved to the UK to run that as well. And that was using my skills as a musician of event management, people, problem solving. And I was pretty burnt out from music. I'd been running on fumes for a while and really hadn't dealt with the story I was telling myself about who I was as a musician, which was that I was just a complete failure. And it sort of got to the point I needed to run away, actually, from the industry altogether. So I started up with my then business partner a technology consulting practice in London, which is not something that musicians usually do. But, I knew how to organise things, and I'm good with people, and I know I can learn. So we started this consulting practice, and, we were working alongside the likes of PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte Consulting, and our clients were, Ford Motor Company and global banks, and we built that up to sort of be turning over $15 million. And we had 50 staff across multiple countries. Nobody knew I was a musician because I was so ashamed of what had happened. And then we sold that business and I came back to Australia, and I sort of started to think about, actually, maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe the system, there were some issues with the system, and I was just a slightly wrong-shaped person. That it's a system that's all about reductionist until they've only got a certain type of person left. And I'm just a little bit outside that with my background. So I thought, well, I'll just start playing again. I hadn't played for 16 years, and I started playing and auditioned for the Queensland Symphony Orchestra and did some casual work with them. So that sort of ticked that box of, is it me? Is the problem me? And then I realised, well, no, the problem isn't me. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just curious to see where this might take me. So I went back to uni in my early 40s. I had 2 little children, and decided to tackle a Masters of French Horn performance degree at my early 40s. And it's pretty unusual thing to do. But I realised sort of day 2 of that degree, when everything around me could still have been 1991 or 1921 or 1891 or 1821, that the models in the way, the hidden curriculum, the hidden student experience, and the actual curriculum were really probably not fit for purpose for the challenges that come as wanting to work in the world of music. So that sort of got me started on, maybe the Venn diagram of my musicianship and my business self, the perfect overlapping circle of those is in re-engineering the model and bringing this sort of business and entrepreneurship into the world of the way we train musicians, all along the pathway. So the way we talk to musicians really from years 8 or 9 onwards, those really high potential musicians who are curious about a life in music, right through their training and then even into their early career when they don't have the support and structure of the tertiary institution and they're quite at risk. And it's something that you care very deeply about resilience and sustainability. How do we help them deal with the precarity of the life? So that's the work that I do now. I'm very lucky to have a role at the Conservatorium of Music here. I'm the lecturer in music entrepreneurship, and on my days off when I'm not there, I work with institutions around the world to help try and understand what is the community in which their musicians need to work, and what are the priorities of that community, and therefore what are the skills that the musicians are going to need to be able to thrive and create value and make music that has meaning for their community. And then I build the training models and either deliver that training or support their staff to do that. The end.
Wow, yeah.
Thanks for asking.
Well, you brought it all back to where you began there by using the C word, community. So you said before that that music with the band was the soundtrack of the life of the community, of your community, and so I wonder. In the professional classical music space, is part of the problem that there is a lack of community? Is it or is it a different form of community? How does community actually? What does it look like in classical music?
Really great question. I do actually, although I work mostly with classical musicians, I do actually work right across all of the performing arts. So I do, I do sometimes work with NIDA and work with people who are in the world of film and TV, and I do sometimes work with visual artists and organisations. So I'm really lucky that I get to work with artists and leaders right across both the performing and the visual arts field. But I think that there's just a bunch of common challenges that we're all facing, regardless of what the creative discipline is that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the question you're asking about community in classical music is really interesting, because if we said within the walls or in the tent of either the institution or the academy or the organisation, it's pretty competitive in a very unhealthy way. There's very much, and I'm making gross assumptions here, of course there are outlying organisations, but generally we live in a mindset of scarcity, and it's a little bit of the Hunger Games, that if you get something, that it's a fixed amount of assets. You get something, it means that I can't get it, rather than you got something, that's fantastic for you. Now I'm going to go, figure out how to create value somewhere else or do something that's distinctive and unique. There's a whole load of reasons I think that happens, but we do train, particularly in classical music, into a very binary way of thinking. It's perfectly correct according to this very, very specific set of rules, or it's wrong. So we don't. Whereas non-notated musicians or improvised musicians, jazz musicians, they don't live in a world that's so reductionist about correct and incorrect. But in classical music, we live incorrect in the world of correct, because there's ways that this music must be. I'm using "must be" in air quotes, must be performed for it to be right. And any deviation from that is not viewed as an artistic choice and a way to bring yourself to the music. It's actually viewed as being incorrect and against the wishes of someone who's long dead, basically. So what I'm getting to is the community. There are spaces where this is happening in organisations that are leaning into values-led ways of operating to share a common purpose and putting codes of conduct in place. But generally, this terms of we all thrive, a rising tide lifts all boats, there's space for everyone, is generally not, unfortunately, the way it's working in classical music. It's pretty competitive in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the last time we caught up, you told me how recently in Australian orchestras there's one particular, I can't remember which instrument it is, but two positions have just come up, and they only come up once in a lifetime. It's once someone has that role in an orchestra, it's theirs as long as they can keep hold of it. So I suppose that does drive competition to some extent, but it's the norms, I guess, is what you're referring to, is that these traditions that are so ingrained and long standing. It's how do you break down things that are so deeply ingrained and so held on to so dearly, I suppose, is the question. And it would be the same across other areas of the arts as well.
Yeah, and I think particularly, classical music is a little bit of the canary in the coal mine because of the privilege, and I'm using that word small p, privilege it really does require to be able to participate. You need an instrument generally, or if you're a singer, even if you're a singer, you need to purchase music. So all of it has a cost. It's very difficult for you not to be involved if you don't have quite a lot of financial privilege involved. And I think that's where my background is a little bit different than in the brass band world. When you join the band, you get an instrument. So it is actually pretty cheap, and they give you a uniform. And all that you have to provide is an $8 foldable music stand. Everything else is given for you. Whereas in the classical world of the youth orchestras, you have to have your own instrument. You have to provide your own clothes for the concerts and stuff. So it is a little bit different. But the way I'm actually addressing this, because I've been thinking really deeply, I love thinking about systems and where we can put a lever in to get the most value and the speed at which that value is going to return. So in our world, one of the ways that I was thinking about this is about the pipeline, right? And this applies to all creative disciplines. The pipeline starts either in primary school or secondary school. And in Australia, not just classical musicians, but all musicians, and also other disciplines like dance and drama, most young people being involved in that will do some sort of exam. It's a pretty common model. So my brain went to where is the pinch point that one intervention can impact as many people as possible at the most important time in their lives. And so I thought about this examinations experience that they all have. So I actually worked with the AMEB, who are the Australian Music Examinations Board, and a shout out to them because they're just wonderful, wonderful people, to refine a model where not only could you do your exam, which was your scales and your repertoire, but you could actually it's the equivalent of like a Duke of Edinburgh award through music. And there's two things that you can get through that. One of them is an award for contribution to community, which is what we were just speaking about. And the other is about entrepreneurship and leadership, which is about so the contribution to community is like the gift that you give to others. And then the leadership and the entrepreneurship is the investment that you make in yourself. So right from pretty much sort of, a late primary school, if you're involved in the AMEB examination sort of system, you can go play at an aged care home or at a kindergarten, or busk outside your scouts to raise money to go towards their trip that they want to take somewhere. So you can go do community contribution through music, which is where I came from, playing at the old people's home, and you can put up your case for support to evidence that you undertook that activity and get a certificate that goes in your folio that you can present to employers or other things. So that's the community one. And then the entrepreneurship one is the things that you can choose to do that are sort of independent but creating value. So maybe something like you might want to create a Spotify playlist for the school band for the music that you're playing at the end of year concert, or you design the posters, or you help with the library, or you take responsibility for the seating plan. But it's this leadership and entrepreneurship part, or you put on a fundraising concert in your house and the funds go to the Lost Dogs Home. So, and again, you evidence that with some photos. It's a fairly easy process. And then you get an acknowledgement of this wonderful thing that you've done for yourself. So I'm really keen to see with that. It just got launched last year. And I'm really keen nationally. So I'm really going to be fascinated to see what starts happening in the next 2 to 3 years as the musicians who've had the awareness that, I can do more with my music than just play an exam or play at school. It's a way for me to give and invest in myself, to see how that starts playing in the students who are coming through into the tertiary system, and then what that does to that community that cohort that they're going through with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing, Susan. Yeah, no, I've got my best friend and his family have just moved to Melbourne from the UK. Huge move. 3 kids, aging, I think 6 to 12 and 12 or 13. And the eldest just went straight into high school. and within the first week was given an instrument. I think the trumpet was what his mum said, and and I wonder if it's part of this program, whether, so Noah's probably never ever picked up an instrument before, or if he has, probably not the trumpet, and it's just so this invitation then to explore, not just, I think it's not about playing an instrument with a view to becoming a musician at some point, but it's exploring all the possibilities across the creative industries, across the arts. So as you say, producing the Spotify playlist for the school, that's an invitation into exploring potential as a music producer or even a movie producer or whatever. Wow, that's really blown my mind. So there's something that you say on your LinkedIn page, which I find really interesting, and you say, get them early. And so is this what you mean by get them early? Is building a safe space in which young people can explore their full potential through music?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only early in the primary and secondary years, but actually also in that really critical tertiary period where they are exploring who they are as people and the place that they want to inhabit in the world. And I don't know about you, Tim. You teach at university as well, and I don't know if you're seeing this, but a couple of years ago, the push, actually the demand from our students now about safe spaces, about equity, about voice, about self-care it's like completely turned on its head since COVID. Are you seeing the same thing in your students about what they're expecting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we're ready for it yet. We are. This is brave new world stuff. This is brand new territory that we're in, and I don't think the tools we have are good enough for it. In creating safe spaces, it needs to be all part of the training as an educator, in my view.
And I think I completely 100% agree, because any of the research about psychological safety, neuropharmacology, the way the body and the vagus nerves and the way the central nervous system works, is if that is on alert, you cannot learn. And so many students that we see in all of our disciplines have had something that has made them feel unsafe in a learning environment. And so as soon as they get into another learning environment, it might be with someone who is very safe in a very welcoming space, but their body hijacks them, the biology hijacks them, and it turns off their ability to be, they're just, as Brene Brown says, they're just armor up. I'm sure you've seen this as well. And I see how this is kind of relevant to a more broader audience that's listening is if you work with anyone in the creative industries, they've probably been kicked to the curb at some point, either, sort of on all the jobs that we apply that we never get, the projects we get, we dream of, our little project brain babies that never see the light of day, the grants we didn't get, and it's not just the outcome, but it's the process of how we got to that outcome was not safe. It didn't prioritize transparency and empathy. You just get that. Thank you very much for your application. We were impressed with the number of applications and overwhelmed, and you didn't get yours, and there's no feedback for you to help how to advance and improve your applications for next time. So although we're talking about this in the context of young people in tertiary, if you're working with anyone in the creative industries, they've had some kind of crappy experience that was really poorly designed, that didn't acknowledge the amazingness of who they are as whole human beings, and that leads from emotional dysregulation right up to trauma response. And so when we're dealing with other people in the creative sectors and their response to our stimulus is really out of whack, often that's what's going on, is they're responding to something that's happened in the past to them. It wasn't something that we did in the last 5 minutes, but their body hijacked them. They felt so unsafe from that it's coming back to the forefront now. And then that ability to sit in creative conflict, to sit in constructive discussion, to kick around ideas, start with a blank sheet, that just gets compromised because people they just don't feel safe from previous experiences. So all we can do now to sort of try to do what we can to create safe spaces for people to do their best work. I mean, that's all we can do. We can't heal other people's trauma, but we can create, we can have our own processes that don't perpetuate that.
Yeah, and I think this is the flip side to the entrepreneurial discourse of resilience. And so where I think we're understanding now, as you said, it's so something I always do with students is I don't ask them, or what did you think of the work you've just done? How did it make you feel? And it's amazing how you can actually build a meaningful connection there to understand. And I, as the educator, can get a sense of this was a little uncomfortable for this particular person. And so, I think the knowledge is out there. It's I suppose it's up to people like yourself to piece it together in a way that to bring it, to bring it together so that we can, as you say, not take on. You're not taking on people's traumas, whatever, but what you're doing is not, and you're not necessarily building up their resilience, but I guess the work that you do is very much about helping them to manage their own well-being. And so you've just published Navigate Well, which is a career guide for the arts. And I've been following along with that and downloaded my copy. And I have to say, there's so much of that I can take away, not just as an artist, but in life in general. So I wonder if you could tell us more about that particular piece of work and how it came about and why it's so important.
Oh, thank you, Tim, and I really appreciate your kind words. You've been really supportive. I think something that might join the last conversation and lead into this conversation is you're asking about get them early. And I think one of the reasons we need to get people early is because they don't know the rules yet. And so rather than having to help people see that the rules that they have unknowingly adopted as norms in the way the industry works are unhelpful through to traumatizing, if we can work earlier on in the training model with our creatives to help before they realize there are these rules, unspoken and spoken rules, we can set them up for better success, which is primarily around these areas of values and self-care. So I really wrote, Navigate Well's it's an interesting beast because I was trying to grapple the really gnarly problem that everybody's journey is distinctive. And so I'm a fan of frameworks. So what I was trying to come up with was a framework that would allow people to hang their own coats on the coat hangers, but that the frames themselves were the key things that I feel are most critical to being able to have a sustainable practice. So the team at the Arts Centre Melbourne has this fantastic program called the Arts Wellbeing Collective, and if people haven't come across that, I'd really highly recommend they check it out. It's just a bunch of amazing resources. And they realised that wellbeing has to include career wellbeing because paying the rent and getting a gig are often the same thing. So you just can't untangle careers from sort of wellbeing. So they asked me to write something, and they pretty much said. They gave me a deadline. That was the only instruction that I had.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How many commissions do you get like that, hey?
Oh, well, and we built the trust. I had been working with them as an expert both a facilitator and an advisor on that program for some time. So they were pretty trustworthy that they knew what they were getting in for when they said, go, just give us a deadline. So what I wanted to think about was that it was a guide that was in 2 parts, and one of the parts was sense making about the things about the industry that are not that, hey, you've got to suck it up, but just there's the way the industry works, and helping people to understand that by choosing to work in the industry, you're choosing to come into you're coming into this space where this is the way things work, and there is actually a lot more that you can control than you may believe you can control. So that was sort of the first part, was that situationing of things like it's a highly decentralized model. The large organizations hold a tremendous amount of power. They are heavily reliant on the freelance community. The business models are under threat at the moment, and a lot of these organizations, creative organizations, are examining their purpose for existence in the face of, the threats to revenue from lots of other ways. So I just wanted to do a little bit in the first part of the guide, which is about 15 pages of this is how we work, this is how the industry works, because it is written for right across the sector. So then, I wanted to write it for someone who'd been pushing a road case up into a truck on rock gigs for 25 years, as well as someone who plays the French horn in an orchestra, or a playwright, or a makeup designer. So the industry kind of works in this way to paint this big picture. And there are things that are really unhelpful, and pointing out some of those things as well, to say, the push to do more with less resources. The stories that we tell about what success looks like, that these things they're untrue and unhelpful. And there's actually a lot of things you can control. So then the second part of the document is basically a set of framing information around 4 key principles, and then just asking the reader to do the work. And as we talked about before, our role as educators is to kind of do the sense making of what we're trying to learn, and then wayfinding, but letting people do the work for themselves. So the 4 kind of bits at the second part of the document talks about values, because we often don't think about that, and the things that we care very deeply about as human beings might be actually in conflict with the work that we're making or doing. And then we wonder why we don't feel very good about things sometimes. So the first one's about values. The second one's about time, the model of time that people want to have. The third section's about how they want money to work for them as a tool, and also addressing the fear of talking about money and this, rubbish idea that if you talk and care about money, that you don't care about the work, that you're a sellout. And then the fourth thing that I think, along with the 2 things that surprise people most in my work, is number one, the talk about values, and how when we start talking about values, they realize it's everything. Time and money is pretty obvious, but the fourth thing that people don't realize is they can decide the kind of colleagues and collaborators that they want to work with, and they can choose to work with them and choose not to work with people that are not aligned with them. And that is quite shocking for people a lot of the time, this realization that you can make a decision about the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with, and actively go and seek opportunity to collaborate and connect and work with them, rather than just being like a bug on the windshield and stuff's just flying at you. And, like particularly for me, we sort of touched on this quite a few times, is I can't work with people who can't regulate themselves emotionally. I can't. It sets off my freeze mechanism, and I can't speak. I get disassociated. I can't play if that's what's going on. And I'm absolutely not going to name any names, but there are people in the industry who are very, very good at what they do, but they are so unpredictable in their response that I cannot be in a room with them. And that they're making their own choices. They're making a choice to conduct themselves maybe unknowingly in that way, and that's fine. But I'm making a choice not to be in the room and not to work with them. So that actually shocks people that you can make these choices, even as a freelancer in any part of the kind of creative industries.
Yeah, no, and that is it, isn't it? I mean, this kind of keeps coming up time and time again in the on the podcast is how we value our own work, how we value our own being with the work, being in a situation, and and it all comes back to what our values are, but then also this economic value. What is the value of this situation to me? And as you say, I think that in a competitive landscape, you talked about competitiveness before, but in the sort of broader idea of we're in a busy, time compressed, competitive landscape across the arts and creative industries and every sector, and life in general is it would be too easy to rush in, to be hasty, to go in and volunteer for something when you could get paid for it, or overcommit. It would perhaps be a better way of putting it. And so this is what Navigate Well is all about. Is it helping us to perhaps make better decisions?
I think it's designed to help people get to know themselves better beyond the craft, because if you've been through any sort of training institution in the creative industries, it will have helped you with the craft, but it probably didn't help you with the commerce, and it also probably didn't help you with the internal life that we all lead. So what I'm trying to do is bring some of that commerce in. So there is actually even a calculator for you to work out how much you need to charge per hour, working backwards from the amount of money you want to earn annually. And that blows people's minds that you can do that. And then when they do that exercise, so they say, okay, I'd like my and talking about take-home income, gross and net, because what you charge the client is not what you have in your bank account. You've got to take your tax out of that. And then when they work backwards, they suddenly realize that they actually need to charge 2 to 3 times what they're charging per hour now to reach that annual income. So really, what I'm trying to help people do is to realize that there's that if you don't want to do this work of knowing what you need, setting your own boundaries, being kind and clear about the value of your work for others it's okay to make this your passion. Like, you don't have to struggle and suffer to try and make a model work, to make it your job, your profession, if you don't want to do this other stuff. That's absolutely fine. But the work of being a creative is 25% the creative work and 75% the commerce and all the other stuff, right? And if you don't want to do so, and we talk about that in the guidance, if what you're realizing out of this is you just don't want to do this is the path to me to well-being, safety and sustainability in a practice, this book. And if you don't want to do the work of knowing yourself more deeply, curating and managing your boundaries, that's fine. Just do the thing because you love it and go do something else to pay the rent, because the work to do to make it to deal, as you use the word precarity so beautifully, the work you do to have to get around that can be so taxing that if you don't want to do it, that's fine. Make it a thing, turn it into a hobby, and just take all the commerce out of it and do it as something that's really precious and important to you. So I think the big takeaway, I actually put a LinkedIn post up, it was either this morning or yesterday, but you could encapsulate the whole experience of the guide by basically saying you can't control the weather, but you can control if you stand out in the rain. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what this guide is all about.
This is the thing, right? Again, something else that's come up in previous podcasts is all the things they don't teach you at art school. But there are art schools out there where you do learn about commerce and so on. I saw a great video on YouTube, and I'll try and find it and add a link to the show notes for listeners. It was an artist who was speaking about their experiences of going to Falmouth College in the UK, and said they even taught you how to do your taxes. And this is the interesting thing for me is I through the work I do here and elsewhere, meeting so many artists who, I'm like it myself. I hate doing my taxes. Absolutely, it's like washing the car. I put it off. I procrastinate, but it's so important. And so, what I'm interested in, Susan, is we're coming back to. I'd love to come back to your role at the conservatorium. So, how do you find this help musicians, students, the people you work with? How do you help them to find this balance that's comfortable for them between being entrepreneurial and practicing their music, whatever?
Yeah, and I think we could also, I'm happy to speak about that, and we can also sort of talk about this in the context of really any creative practice, of the balance between the craft and the other stuff. I think I'm not going to rag on art schools around the world about them not teaching how to do taxes, because that's not the problem. The problem is not that they're not teaching it. The problem is they're not saying you will need to know how to do more than paint. We can't teach you everything you will need to know. So we have chosen to spend the very precious gift of our time together focusing on these things only, to the detriment or to the cost of these other things that you will need to know. So that's the problem. It's not that they're not teaching it, but they're not being explicit about the fact that they can only do, and any degree. My sons are doing, science and technology degrees. They're not teaching them to do tax in those degrees either. So the fact that that we're not teaching them how to do that is not the problem. The problem is that the conversation about you will need to know more than we can teach you. And these are the kind of things that you will need to know, and we can't teach you those, but you can Google. There's plenty of resources you can find. And our precious time together, we have decided that it's best spent focusing on these areas. So that's the real problem, is that's not going on, is they're not being explicit in the choice they're making, in the choices that they're making about what to teach and what not to teach.
Yeah, okay. So I was just thinking then more broadly, in the attention economy, what we project is positivity and success all the time. And what we don't do a lot of is talk about all the hard work and graft that goes on behind the scenes to be able to achieve those things. What we get is a 5-second TikTok, which shows the artwork we've just made, but not the process that's gone on behind that. Or even if we are showing the process, we don't necessarily show the roadblocks, the failures, the things that have gone wrong. So with Navigate Well and the other work you do, how are you helping people to perhaps embrace that vulnerability that's going on behind the scenes, and perhaps be a bit more open about it? And how, I suppose the big question is how can we create a industry sector, or even an economy in which people actually listen when we do express what our vulnerabilities, our failures are, and perhaps seeing some of these roadblocks not as failures, but actually developmental.
In our household, we call them an unintended consequence. So nothing's ever a failure, because you can decide what failure looks like. And for us in our house, failure is only the choice not to give something a go. And then whatever the result is, that was an unintended consequence, whether it's burnt toast or a science experiment or a music exam. So I think the language that we use is really critical, actually, and we have such an emotional response to words, is that we can choose to use different words. And I know we're sort of joking about this, using the word failure in a different way, but it's legitimately transformed my practice and sort of our family, who are all musicians, practice to just choose to use different words about, I didn't think that was going to happen, but it did. What did I learn from that? And even things like as classical musicians, we and I'm going to answer the question more broadly, but particularly in our world, we're trained to find fault with everything. That's where we're just a bunch of trained to look at everything that's not right everywhere. That's the way most teaching goes in classical music, is you take the instrument off your face and the teacher tells you all the things you did wrong, right? So you can imagine what that sets up as a way to be in the world, in people. So like when I'm teaching, if I'm teaching French horn, when I'm working with them to unlearn the rules, is to say, what went well? And sometimes it'll take them 7 minutes to get to a thing. And we talk about it in advance that I am going to ask you this question. And even if the response is, I took a really good breath, that's great. So we have to firstly re-engineer the way where the attention, where the flashlight goes, to acknowledge what was good, and then we can move on to what we might change that could make that better. So I think in terms of more broadly in the sector, and you're asking about the work at the Conservatorium, this also applies to my work more generally, is Seth Godin has this really fantastic phrase about shun the haters. So I'm a bit of a shun the haters person. I'm just really clear what my work is for. And if it's not for you, I have no emotional attachment to that. You go live your life, buddy. That's awesome. I hope that works out for you. But I'm not trying to convince people. So in all of my work, I try to be a beacon that attracts people who are seeking this kind of clarity and support, and those that look at it and go, that's a pile of rubbish, I'm just going to XYZ, do my thing. That's great. So firstly, the work is about just being this beacon to people and supporting those who come with a loving and open heart and generosity and clarity as much as I can. Then you're asking just about normalizing kind of the messy stuff that we do that no one ever sees. So one of the things, it's a very practical thing that I do when I'm coaching people, is I actually ask them I ask them lots of questions about what is the work that they do. And so, for instance, my wife is a professional conductor, so lots of her work is sitting in front of scores for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on end. But what you see is her waving the stick at the concert, right? But the real work is this other stuff. So whatever your process is, if you're a painter, or there'll be the outcome, but there's all the hard graft that goes in that nobody ever sees. Is I ask people to price that up, because what happens is usually when you get asked to do a piece of work, you magic up a number from somewhere, maybe with a vague idea. Maybe the number that you think is what you think they're going to say yes to without thinking you're asking too much, or there's often not a lot of process behind how that number comes to. But what I ask people to do is actually to keep a diary of the work that it takes to do the work. Because what often happens is where there's a bit of thought distortion going on, and we might think we spent 10 hours doing that program notes for the gallery opening, but we actually spent 40. And so when they ask you to price it up, your brain says, "Oh, that only takes 10 hours, and I'll charge $75 an hour. So I'll say $500." But in fact, you're working 40 hours for $500. So I think it's really important that we take responsibility for having an accurate evaluation, which is keeping a time log rather than relying on our memory of actually how much time the work really takes. And so that when we do get asked to do a piece of work, we can say, "Thank you so much for asking me. Looks like a really fantastic project. I'd love to do this. Give me the details that I need to know. Could you just leave that with me for 24 hours? Because I'm going to go back and do a little bit of scoping, and what I'll come to you with is with a price, with a breakdown of what's going to be involved." So number one, not saying yes, and giving yourself a gap between the ask on you and your response. And then you go back and you sit down and you say, "Okay, last time I did something like this, actually, how much time did it actually take me? And how much do I want to charge? Do I have a different rate for, I have a different rate for my different types of work. So do you have a different rate for that work? Say, it's score study versus the concert, or maybe it's editing versus giving the presentation. And then just putting that up to the people and saying, look, really excited, so excited about doing this piece of work for you. It's going to take approximately 10, 100, however many hours. And you can put it in writing. You don't need to have this conversation in person, but to actually break down to the people who are often on a salary, the administrators, to break down the actual amount of hours and the per hour cost. So I think that's kind of, in a good way, there's an opportunity for us to regain control of setting expectations of people that we work with about how long the work actually takes to do, and also the standard of the work. Like, I'm charging more for my work now than I was years ago because I'm more highly skilled, and sometimes I'm quicker at it, sometimes I'm not, but there's a standard of work that I expect of myself and that people expect of me. And I'm just really clear to say I'm not involved in getting in a race to the bottom on price with other people, because if they only care about price, I can say to them, well, I can reduce the work I'm doing for you. So instead of a 1,000-word piece, I can give you 600 words. So if you can't move on the price, I can move on what I'm delivering for you. But if you're going to stand firm on that you want 1,000 words for $100, I'm not the right person. Thanks so much for asking of me. The quality of the work that I do, I can't turn that out in that, and it wouldn't be something I would be happy to put my name on. So also knowing that standing by these values of, it may mean that you say you let things go, but ultimately, do you want to have your name attached to that work in the end anyway?
That's a great point. Yeah. Look, it is. Yeah. So yeah, there's a great takeaway there for so many of us. I think being very confident, first of all, being very logical, very rational, meticulous in our process, so that we can actually identify and justify the true value, and then being confident in proposing what we can do, but then building some flexibility into that, so that, and as you say, if low quality, low value work, do we really, really want it? And I suppose there would be people who might sort of question, okay, but so what if they do turn their back on me and go somewhere else? I can go through all of that work to try to to get the best price for my work, but then they turn around and say no thanks, and you never hear from them again. But actually, I wonder whether that's the case. More and more I see that when you do a good job and you're known for doing a good job, the work does come to you. So by, as you say, not getting into a race to the bottom, by elevating the work that you do, and properly valuing it, then you're going to get more of the same, I guess.
And I think, Tim, what I've found time and time again is that, and I'll use the analogy of an orchestra just because it's an easy one to use, is sometimes people need a French horn player and they'll take the first person that says yes. Sometimes people want me. So what I'm looking for in my work off the stage is I want to work with people who want to work with me. And if they want to work with me, this dance of, our budget is fixed at this point, we'll make it work. We'll do a dance. And if I can propose a couple of options for them, like, for instance, let's reduce the word count down, or I could do it at that price, but it'll be 3 months, not 3 weeks. Or I can do it at that price if you can guarantee me that there'll be 2 more of these coming in the next 12 months. Or, whatever the flexibility is. So they know that when they're working with me, we're going to find a way that it's going to work for everybody, and that those negotiations are going to be met in a really clear way, with no, I'm not going to stand up and rant about, you don't appreciate the value of my work. We're simply going to, so the way in which you conduct those negotiations, but more just 100% of the time, I've never lost a client we've always managed to find a way. And if we haven't found a way right then in that opportunity, the next time they needed something, I was the first person they called, because the experience had been really professional and kind. And I understand that they may have a fixed budget to deal with. And sometimes weird stuff happens. Like I go back and say, actually, it would cost twice that much. And they say, sure, we didn't have any idea. So we just picked a figure out of the blue. So you never know that sometimes they just picked a figure and they didn't really understand. But what I want to work with is people who want to work with me because the experience of working with me in the commerce part, and then it's really easy and smooth and professional. And we found a way to kind of find an acceptable ground for everybody. Or if we haven't, that we've parted ways on really positive terms. And I've suggested other people that might be suitable for the work. But that just time and time again means, I just have so much repeat business from people because the experience of working with me outside, if I'm lecturing or guest speaking or writing or whatever it is I'm doing, that they know they're really confident that's going to be fine. And then the negotiation part is also going to be pretty smooth sailing. So I've found often this, because you're asking about normalizing the process and all the unpaid labor that goes in, is that often, particularly when we're working with administrators from organizations, they just don't know. And they're having a guess to get the conversation started. So if we can do anything that really gently helps them to understand more of what it takes for us to do the work, they're generally really appreciative of that. It helps them be more insightful. It helps them come to the conversation with a more appropriate ask next time. And then I guess for people, all those videos, the TikTok videos and stuff where something that takes 7 hours takes 2 seconds. Well, ask yourself, do you want to be part of do you want to be someone who makes those videos? And instead, there's other ways your process and your content can be shared that isn't perpetuating this instant gratification.
Yeah. Look, earlier you talked about how just 25% of the work we do, approximately, so it's the Pareto rule, 80-20 roughly, but it's this thing of the creative work, the thing that we're really passionate about. We don't have to lose our passion in that, because the 80% of the rest of the work that we do, we can be quite dispassionate about it. We can actually do it. We can do it in a logical, rational, business-like way and not have to invest too much emotionally in it, if we actually develop a process, a structure, a way of doing it so that we can quickly and easily go into a negotiation, as you've suggested, and come out the other end maybe surprised and delighted by the outcomes, and repeat business coming along the way. So yeah, look, it's a piece of work that we can all engage with, and certainly myself. I know that's the bit I said before. It's not just doing my taxes. There's so much more I could learn. So look, Susan, I feel like this is just part one of a very long conversation. I'm sure by the time we catch up again, you'll have moved on to the next project and you'll have new and fresh ideas to share with us all. So I do hope that one day you'll come back on the podcast and share more. We've got so much out of what you've taught us today, but I suppose here's one little question that I did put to you, but you didn't quite get to, I don't think, which is... And I'll reframe it where I was really interested in, how might the sector adapt and change. But perhaps, if you were to envisage a more inclusive, safer, more sustainable ecosystem across the arts, what would it look like for you? What would it feel like, in fact?
Yeah, that's really, really a very big, hairy, amazing question. And I did dodge it. Thank you for bringing me back to it. I think for me, it all starts with individual responsibility. And this is what I'm not saying we have to put up with practices that are intolerable, abusive, illegal. But what I'm saying is I believe really strongly that it's on all of us, both as freelance creatives and both as executive and leadership and management and administrative within the institutions, to kindness we just can't be. It's free. So I think simply being kinder to each other, that we're doing extraordinary work that amplifies what it means to be humans and connects us. And I think just choose it, having a clear set of values for you as an individual, for how you want to show up at work and how you want to collaborate and connect with others, and holding yourself accountable to those things. So I think it starts with just this level of individual responsibility, and then the next step of that is, if you see others engaging in their work and in the world in ways that is out of alignment with your choices, is to just step away and let them do themselves. Let them do them. So we're not here, I'm not suggesting we shame or call out any of the practices, but take responsibility for yourself and the choices that you're making to be someone who's making a positive contribution through your work, and surrounding yourself with others who are doing the same thing. So I think that magnetizing into groups to find others who have a shared alignment is going to go a long way.
And then we all become the insiders and those others become the outsiders.
Yes.
Perhaps. Susan, thank you so much. You've taken us on a journey and a really deep and comprehensive learning journey. There's so much to take away from this. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and energy.
Thanks, Tim. I'm really grateful. And big love out to all the creatives out there. We need your expertise, so go forth and make things.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Connect, Curate, Create. I hope you found inspiration and insights that you can apply to your own creative work. For highlights and links, check out the show notes, and be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast player so you never miss an episode. Tune in next time as I continue to explore life and work in the arts.